How do you do? My name is Ricardo Di Done. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Children Now. Children Now aims to improve the life of families, but especially of our children. In late spring of 2018, we hosted our 9th symposium on the theme Families in the 21st Centuries. On that occasion, we invited the best mind in matters of family law and mediation in Montreal. The high point of this reunion is when we addressed them questions submitted to us by real parents living through real difficulties. Now, these are people in distress. They're looking for good answer, most enriching answer. Let us hope we can find solution for all of them. Parental alienation. I had custody of my 13-year-old daughter since she was the age of 5. Her father found a new spouse who is much appreciated by my daughter to the extent where she does not want to see me anymore. Not even on weekends. I can thus no longer exercise my right of access. Certain people have advised me to not take action. Now, should I accept to continue paying the alimony? Or wait till I am requested to pay for child support? Should I continue writing to my daughter? Is this the best way to proceed? Or let the father take all action? Can I contact a mediator despite our couple had never used this process to date? Can my daughter participate in mediation? That's quite the question, because I think there's 6 questions in one questionnaire.
My answer to the question with respect to child support, if the child has been living with dad and his new partner for 6 months, in my opinion, that's some sense of permanency with respect to the change in circumstances. So I would have mom voluntarily make the child support payments, figure out from the guidelines how much she owes, for 2 reasons. One, it will show the daughter that she's actually interested in her well-being and taking care of her. And 2, because she has a legal obligation to pay it. I would not wait to be asked. She should voluntarily pay it. And child support's the right of the child, not the other parent. If it's less than 6 months, then what I would do is I'd reach out to dad and I'd say, look, we don't know if this is just a novelty for her or if it's something that works permanently. And again, we have to also make sure that it's in the best interest of the child that she's living with dad and their new partner. But I'm assuming that's the case if mom hasn't taken any steps to do anything different. So yes, child support I would continue to pay.
We don't know, based on this question, what made the child leave, whether there was any intervention, whether mom sees the child at all now, what the child's reasons are, whether mom and dad are in conflict, whether they have any conversations with each other about that. So there's a whole lot we don't know that we need to understand in order to help mom, not just with the payment of child support, which I agree. I think any non-payment can be misinterpreted poorly and used poorly and is not good for the child. But from a child-centric or family-centric mental health perspective, we need to understand more. And I would think that potentially a look at by a mental health professional of what happened, how can we help to see if it would be better to have for mom to have some time with the child, to have some time with mom, and to do an assessment and then take it from there. I wouldn't accept this as fact at this point.
So basically, what comes with it is also, should I continue writing to my daughter? Is this the best way to proceed, or let the father take all action? Can I contact a mediator despite our couple had never used this process to date, and can my daughter participate in mediation?
It's very important if a parent has had a good relationship with a child and it ends suddenly and there's not been an incident of abuse, and here it's the parent who's saying, I think things were fine, I don't know what's happening, to respond as quickly as possible. That doesn't mean over a weekend, but within a period of weeks or months, say, why isn't she visiting me? And certainly one route would be to say, I think the first thing to do is get in touch with dad, and maybe that's happened, but to say, what's happening? Why doesn't she want to see me? And of course, dad would say, well, she said, whatever. And you say, well, I'm really concerned about this in terms of her welfare, in terms of my rights, and I think parental rights have some role in that. Say, we really need to do something about this. Is there a skilled mediator in our community who, for example, will in some way involve our child in that process. The fact that we haven't been to mediation before doesn't mean we can't go now, but it does, in most jurisdictions, require that the father say, yes, I will go to mediation, that's good. I do not want an adversarial process. I am child-focused. If the father says, get lost, this is what the child wants, start sending me child support, there may also be a role for a lawyer. And hopefully that lawyer will say, I really think that the daughter should be seeing mom. We have to start into this process. The idea would be go to mediation, because if you don't do that, we're going to begin a court process very quickly. And I should say in Ontario, denial of contact, depending on the circumstances very much, but and we have a process, as in some other places, where you can't get into the courts without a pretrial conference unless it's urgent. And denial of access is an urgent matter. You get into court right away, depending on the circumstance. But if one parent seems to be just blocking the way, say, I want to get into court, that's a lever, that's not a solution, but that's to push people along in Ontario.
Parents supposedly are the adults, and so anything the parent can do to reach out to the child is a good thing. If there's a therapist involved, I might want to see what kind of things the parent's writing, but at least a postcard that says, I love you. It's proof that you're still thinking about the child, and even if the child burns it, tears it, rips it up, they have the experience that you kept writing.
Firstly, my heart goes out to the mother who's asking the question, because she's losing a significant relationship in her life. And when I hear the question about the money, the alimony, the child support, for me, I wonder if it's motivated by anger, upset, resentment, retaliation. And so I would want to convey my concern to that mom and suggest that she not do anything that elevate or escalate the bad feelings already felt apparently towards her by either her former partner or her child. Sometimes, to use Bell Eddy speak, is he in the room? He talks of all or none thinking. And this may be an example as well, as a message to the mom of all or none thinking, that either I see you or I don't see you. And I prefer to ask the questions, under what conditions and situations may I see you? Which can include extracurricular activity, at school, at so many other venues that allow for parent-child contact. So it doesn't have to be placed in this all or none frame. And then I would wonder, how do we convey that to the other side so that there can be a discussion of curiosity and seeking to understand versus shame and blame. And so just some ways to think about that. It may require, to Nick Balla's point, some legal intervention as a lever, but not as the be-all, end-all. It's how do we get the door open to have those conversations about curiosity and understanding, and the legal system may be of assistance.
I wonder whether our responses would be different if this was a dad rather than a mum, whether our suspicions would be higher on the grounds of gender. So are we saying, because this is a mother missing out on time with a child, that our heart goes out to them? And if there was a father missing out on a child, would we say, I wonder what else has happened here that would lead to that? And so I just wonder, as a meta question for us, what would happen if we swapped the gender?
From my response, it wouldn't matter. I was thinking gender neutral when I answered, and I think Gary was as well. But it's a really good question to ask, because sometimes gender is an issue and our biases get in the way.
So, for question number 2. I am a father of a 10-month-old baby who stopped being breastfed. I want shared custody of the baby. I left the baby in his mother's custody for a healthy upbringing. But currently, I have a new spouse, and I feel like I am now ready to take care of my son through shared custody. My question to you is 10 months too young for shared custody?
No, it's not too young for shared custody, but it needs to be developmentally appropriate. So the tension that you have to manage, because you can't have a permanent kind of parenting plan around timeshare. It has to be evolving based on the development of the child. So that tension is that the primary custodial parent, i.e. mom, who is breastfeeding, is going to have to let go of time. It should be appropriate to weaning from breastfeeding. Overnights are generally considered okay by 12 months, so that should be in consideration. On dad's part, he's going to have to realize that certainly by age 3 or 4, a traditional shared custody arrangement, maybe even equal, depending on the other circumstances, would be appropriate. But he's going to have to be patient, and then you're going to have a process, which is hopefully not court-driven, to move them from a situation that will be not, fully shared. So what you try to do from a court-based perspective is say, yes, we've determined that this should be shared, but we have developmental considerations that will necessitate a slow evolution of that. So you set the expectations for both parents. We're going to get there, and then you manage that process, hopefully in a collaborative way. We call them step-up plans, which are now part of the development in the literature. You're going to see a lot of that in articles. How do you do step-up plans which manage this evolution?
A lot depends on what dad was doing until that point. So in some situations, let's say that the parents are living together, and actually mom is working 3 nights a week, and dad is there alone with the child, and then mom is pumping her milk and everything. That's a very different situation from they've never lived together, and now we want shared custody. So I very much agree with Matt. You're going to work towards that depending on where you are. And this is controversial literature, I don't think that overnights themselves are the problem. It's the relationships that are the issue. Now, I know there are people who would say, oh, just overnight, if the child falls asleep somewhere, it's different, it's a problem. But I think children are actually, infants are quite adaptable. They go to their grandparents overnight because their parents are off on vacation, and it's not a big deal. So it's the relationship, and how is the relationship between the parents? Is there conflict? Is there violence? Or conversely, are they child-focused and getting along well?
I really agree with the step-up idea that was described. I would say if he wants to be a really great parent, now he's ready, that this is a really good time to be educating himself. And while he's slowly stepping up, is to spend time really learning about child development, about ways to interact. So he feels like he's doing something, not just waiting as a secondary parent. And of course, I would particularly recommend a program called New Ways for Families, because that's one I developed specifically for divorced and separated parents. But we have an online program now that really talks about the stages of development, shows video clips about brain development, how conflict can hurt the child's development. So I think now, whether you go to a parenting class somewhere, get something online, read books, perfect time for that while you're going through the step-up process.
Yeah, I would work on the co-parenting relationship because I think it's not just one parent, but both parents that are going to have to do some gate opening here and letting go of expectations, whether it's the dad for the speed that he wants the child to be with him, or the mother that may be having a difficult time giving up the child. And improving the co-parenting relationship and the communication with the parents can be the scaffold that holds together that family, because it's still going to be the child's family forever.
Question number 3, directly from Calgary, Alberta. I am the father of 2 children aged 9 and 11 years old and had shared custody since their birth. We always lived in close proximity to facilitate exchange and to permit children from experiencing too many changes in their studies. Except now my son is 11-year-old, will be registering in an intensive sport program and would like to permanently live with me. I would like to have full custody of my oldest child while continue to exercise shared custody with my youngest. Or another way of proceeding is to each of us have full custody of one of our son, and the other one allows them to see each other on weekend. What would you recommend?
The second solution that he proposed, I can't help but think about the younger child and how that child might feel if suddenly dad is like, well, I'm picking the older one and mom can have the younger one, rather than continuing the shared parenting arrangement with the younger one. As a young child, I think that might be hard on the younger one. So I think his first solution, if it's possible to work that out with mom, would be the better one, where he may have full custody of the son because it makes sense to do so, and still share parenting with the younger child.
These are good and tough questions, and I think they're situations that anyone in the room will have faced at some point in their career, if not once, multiple times. These are situations that are often fraught with conflict, and for a third party to come in and offer a solution, rarely in this kind of situation does the solution ever have longevity, and it wreaks havoc on the families. If we agree as a group that it's conflict that is more detrimental to the well-being of the kids versus the decisions that the parents make, we want these parents to make a decision between themselves, whatever that decision is, recognizing that that will have the greatest longevity. And so, you know, the knee-jerk response to the group was, go to mediation. And I just want to explain why, in this circumstance, mediation would be so important. And that's why, so that they can come to a joint understanding, mitigate the risk of ongoing conflict that would flow from some third party imposing a decision.
Just to add to that, certainly conflict, but also the imposition of the decision by a third party short circuits the fact that these folks have to implement this decision. And if they're not both on board because somebody else imposed it, and it, by definition, you know, was not an agreement, what you introduce is typically, and we've all seen this more times than we want to count, is that the parent who isn't on board undermines it in order to prove that it was a bad decision. So that's an additional issue of not having agreement, yeah, that's an important thing too.
This case illustrates that parents have to be prepared for the fact that things will change as children get older, as they move into adolescence, as they have new interests. We're not told, and it's not quite clear from the facts, but if it was really like, this boy is really, really keen on hockey, and the only way this is going to actually be logistically possible if he's living with dad, it looks different from some other ways. And when parents are making their initial agreement, one thing they have to know is this is going to change. Just as in intact families, we don't say, we made a plan when you were 2 years old, we're never changing it. Always there's going to be change, so be ready for it.
And you should seek some child-inclusive mediation so that you can get the voice of the child, figure out what it is that's important to that young person, and then the parents can make an even better plan.
Question number 4, moving. I have always lived in Montreal since I was born. We have shared custody for our 2 children, 13 and 15 years old. My husband will be moving to Toronto in July for work, and my children are students in a French public school. Do I have to move and follow my husband to Toronto, or should I insist that the children stay behind with me? Should we alternate custody every 2 years, 2 years in Montreal and 2 years in Toronto? What would be the value for our children's opinion?
The parents are asking for the professionals to give the answer. And what we keep saying is, it depends. And what I would like the parent to know is, we don't have the answer for your child. So it's important for you to look at what's good about that decision. What else do you need to consider? What's the child's voice or the children's voices? So the question is all the questions we have. That the answer is to keep asking lots of questions. Keep discerning what is important, whether you do it with a mediator or you do it on your own, but to keep discerning what's most important to whom.
I also think it depends on what is the nature of the question. Is she asking from a legal perspective, or is she asking from a child-centered mental health perspective? because the legal answer is no, she doesn't have to follow her husband and move. And although dad has the right to move, what the courts are going to look at is what's in the best interest of the children. And if the children have always been in Montreal, they don't want to upset the status quo because they want to make things as predictable and stable for the children as possible. So the likelihood of the children moving to Toronto, depending on the age and circumstance of the children, how old were the children again?
13 and 15.
Oh, yeah, well, at that age, if they have a closer affinity to dad, they'll probably decide with their feet. However, I think that it's important to note that while children have a voice, they don't have a choice. That really should be between the parents. And I think too much emphasis sometimes is placed on the voice of the child and what the child wants, although it's important and it matters. And in fact, we're signatory to the Rights of the Child Convention with the United Nations that says that anything that profoundly affects a child's life, they should have input on. But we can't stop being parents either. And even a 15-year-old neurologically doesn't think the same way as an adult. And while it may sound really groovy to go to Toronto, a new place, it isn't necessarily in the best interest of that child either.
This is a common mediation issue now, and I think it can be resolved in mediation. In many ways, both parents should be asking each other these questions. With kids this age, I think what often helps is to get their consultation. And so what I recommend to parents is think of 2 or 3 options, any of which you can agree to, and ask the kids for consultation. Tell us what you think about these 2 or 3 options, so they don't have the burden of making the decision, but they're being heard. The other thing is with these kinds of cases, it does evolve. I flew from Toronto, even though I got in after midnight. You're not that far apart. And so you can tinker with the plan. What a lot of parents do is school year with one and major holidays and most of the summer with the other. But it's probably going to evolve with kids this age, just as we talked about in the last scenario, because things are going to change, and the most important is they keep making the adjustments themselves.
One thing that was probably hidden from a lot of people in this is the children being educated in French, and we're saying let's move to Toronto where it's all going to be in English. So I think that's another factor that would probably affect their views, but developmentally, unless they're, some kids, this is great, I'm learning a new language. A lot of kids moving into high school, this is already challenging enough. So that should be a developmental factor in their views.
The tough part of this question is they haven't asked, is the missing piece of information, and that's what each parent think, and have they talked to each other. So that's the sort of gist of all these questions, it seems. We're all committed to a process and to principles and asking all these questions. But everything is, I like what this, it's not an all or none. Even in Toronto, they have French schools. Everything's on the table, and it's whatever they decide and are committed to, I think, at the end of the day.
I think that most of us recognize that there is a tremendous value to children to be raised by 2 parents, whether it's 50-50 or some degree of shared. And if there's no reason why that shouldn't happen, i.e. no safety issues or whatever, that it is best for the children, for the parents to come to a decision where contact can be maintained with both, where the attachment can be maintained with both, and when they get to be 13 and 15, then maybe it's a different story.
Parental coordination. My husband and I have gone to court, and the trial's verdict granted me exclusive custody. My husband had a hard time to have the rights of access to our daughter, who's 8 years old. She's bored when she goes at his place. She cries when she comes back home, and she's tense when she's at his house. He has a spouse, but he doesn't live with her. He threatened me of losing my child custody if my daughters don't want to go and see him anymore. Accordingly to the judgment, what should I be doing?
First of all, I think that since even the law has changed right now, or changing, when we're talking about parenting time, we're talking about the rights of children to spend time with their parents. So maybe if we park custody, or the whole notion of custody, it might make it a lot easier for us to come up with some kind of
I think it's so important, the concept that children need both parents. It's not about father's rights, mother's rights. It's what kids really need. And I think when there's a problem like this, that they really need to do something, in my mind, in terms of skills to solve problems. Whether it's a single family therapist who works with everybody or some skills training method, but that all or nothing thinking is what's being talked about. And often for kids, they absorb their parents' stress and resolve things. In many ways, I think it's like North and South Korea. Nobody lives in the demilitarized zone. You pick an army. So it's not normal for a child to not see both parents. And I think that it's important that those messages come across and that they be given tools and that the focus isn't, quotes, custody. And I really think that's a lousy word. And even access feels a little icky. I really like parenting time. You know, mom's parenting time, dad's parenting time. And if there's a problem, everybody needs to talk, not just dad and the daughter. They also need to include mom and the daughter. So I think talking, problem solving, learning skills is the way to go.
Spousal violence. I have endured long periods of spousal violence. I have 3 children aged 8-year-old, 5 years old, and 3 years old. I had agreed to share custody after having consulted a lawyer. I didn't have the financial means. I was worried that my husband would threaten me through my children. He sometimes lives alone and occasionally with different women. I have a lot of catching up to do when they return home. I don't have a spouse that lives with me, but I am seeing someone. Should I seek help? In what frequency? Can I question the children on their father's attitude? If I take them to see a specialist, do I need their father's consent?
So this is where my litigator brain comes on rather than my mediation brain, so I'm probably not going to be popular in the room when I give my answer.
Is that left or right?
How's your mic going?
So my answer to that is I deal with a lot of clients that are in domestic conflict, and I hear this a lot where one partner, and I'm gonna gender based it. I know that it happens to men. I've got 3 clients right now that are men who are being abused by their wives, but more often than not, it's the women that find themselves in these situations. And usually when there's this power imbalance like that, they're unable to do what's in the best interest of their children because of their own fear. That being said, just because there's intimate partner violence doesn't mean that it's also going to trickle down to the children. So we have to, take a look at the family comprehensively and say, first of all, are there any safety concerns for the children when they're in dad's care? And with dad having this revolving door, is that something that the children are being exposed to? Or is that, just his lifestyle when the children aren't with him? So again, we need more information in order to give a proper response. However, I do think that this particular individual should seek help from a litigator, because oftentimes it gets difficult having a mediation, even lawyer-assisted mediation, when there's a power imbalance. Even if they are suitable for mediation, and I'm not ruling it out, it's good to have a litigator there so that somebody can assert her rights when she's not able to. And now I can be shot by anybody else in the room.
I very much would want to, and I totally agree with what Cindy was saying, that mum needs advice. So often we think about referring mum for counselling and other sources of support, which is all very important. But I think in family violence situations, the first friend she needs is a good lawyer. And so, unlike everything else I've said in the last couple of days, but I think legal support for people who are expressing fear in a relationship is absolutely critical, and she needs to know what her rights and her responsibilities are. We need to work out whether in the children going to dad's house, whether she might be, whether child protection could get involved and say that she's failing to protect the children, and that might put her at risk with another legal system that isn't directly involved with the family law system. And so I would be wanting her to be fully aware of what her rights and obligations are. And then I think this is where us as a sector need to come in and support, even as family mediators, and say, and have the skills and the ability to not just do a screening and a risk assessment, but to do an extensive safety plan. And so we need a safety plan for mum, a safety plan for the children. The children need to be able to access support even when they're at dad's place. That's where I'd be starting.
Even in domestic violence situations, and I agree with all the things about safety, mom should be told the kids are likely to have a relationship with dad in some way. You're going to structure it, maybe it's electronic for a while, but don't think that this is the end of dad's relationship with the kids, or you'll never have to deal with dad again.
I'd like to address the last part of her question, which is, should I involve the kids in, or a child in child therapy? And can I do that without the knowledge and consent of my co-parent? So, first of all, there's potentially a legal problem with that. In my jurisdiction, if you share custody, legal custody, you can't unilaterally engage a child in any kind of treatment, medical or mental health. But more importantly, child therapy is rarely effective and often harmful when, regardless of the circumstance, both parents aren't involved and therefore strongly encouraged or mandated to. I mean, certainly a parent can, in this case, she could tell the father, and the father could say, go ahead and do it, but I'm not going to be involved. But at least there's been that effort. And on both sides, on multiple sides, without both parents involved in child therapy in some balanced way, the child's orientation to therapy is different. If mom initiated, front-loaded, took me to all the therapies, that's going to affect the child's involvement in that therapy. And rather than mom and dad were both involved, they were in intake, they meet with the therapist, and obviously the therapist has the opportunity to answer some of these questions and to potentially give consultation and coaching and interventions to both parents if it's domestic violence or if it's, the mom having an agenda to, that would be my feedback about child therapy and how often it starts out with one parent bringing the child and then it just goes south in a hurry.
Well, thank you. All this completes our answers to the questions of all these concerned parents around the world. So let us all give ourselves a nice hand of applause. I truly hope all your questions, or at the very least some of them, were answered. For the more complex one, please view our different clips, such as the richness of the intergeneration, grandchildren's grandparents, the importance of the implication of the parents, and many more. Visit our site, childrennow.ca. I repeat, childrennow.ca.